Hi, my name is Chuck Gardner, and this is another one of my boring golf tutorials. These tutorials, the goal really isn't about teaching golf, it's about teaching critical thinking. That's what I was hinting at in the last video. I'm not trying to convert anyone to my style of swing because I'm a 74-year-old guy who just, plays for fun. I'm not a competitor. I've never been competitive. I've never had a handicap. I don't need a handicap because I don't compete. Handicaps are just a racket created by golf clubs to get the members to join tournaments. Who would join a tournament if the only people who got an award were the top 5 golfers at the club? So you create a handicap system where everybody gets an award for showing up, and then everybody's happy. Everybody's ego is pleased because they have an award to take home. Well, that's great if that's what you're into. I've never been competitive. One of the reasons I was never competitive as a kid is I've got lousy eyesight. I've got astigmatism so bad in this eye that my brain just basically tunes it out except for detecting motion and light. And so I'm completely left eye dominant. So as a kid, anything involving a thrown ball, I was terrible at. I was the kid out in the outfield who would get hit in the head with the ball because I just couldn't judge depth perception. When I played tennis, I had a wicked forehand because my left eye was dominant, but try to hit a backhand where my dominant eye was over here, I couldn't hit a backhand. So there were some sports that I just didn't participate in, mostly all team sports, simply because I wasn't any good at it. Now golf happened to be one of the things that I managed to get good at because it doesn't require a lot of depth perception. All it requires is intense focus and balance. And your balance comes mainly from your inner ears, the little hairs in your inner ear, which is why you don't want to jerk your head around while you're swinging a golf club. And the other center of balance input for the brain is the 3D vision ranging with your eyes. If you focus on a spot, not the ball, but just over the ball on the path of your dominant eye, it will help you stay in balance. That's why you see golfers, pro golfers, they keep their heads looking down at the same spot until well after they hit the ball. That is how you stay in balance. And that, as I mentioned in the last video, is the primary objective in a golf swing, is staying in balance. If you don't stay in balance, having a powerful swing is just a trip further into the woods to find your ball. So that's the preface for this video. And now what I really want to talk about is how the history of the game, the changes in equipment, have affected how the game has been played over the years. Now, according to books I've read on the history of the game, some credit the name of golf to a Dutch word that was used to describe a sport where they hit balls with heavy sticks like field hockey. The game in Scotland actually is credited to an event in the Scottish Games where it was called the hammer toss. And in the hammer toss, what you do is you spin around swinging a ball on, it was actually a metal ball on a rod. So it was very similar to golf. And the original golf game played in Scotland was played with clubs that had shafts the size of broom handles, stiff shafts with wooden balls. Then what happened is it evolved into the ball change. Somebody decided that they would make the balls out of goose feathers. What they would do is they sewed a leather case and then they boiled goose feathers and then pounded those goose feathers into that ball and then sewed it up. Old Tom Morris and his father or old Tom Morris was the father, and then young Tom Morris, the first golfers of note in Scotland, they started out as feathery ball makers. That was their trade. And when the lighter balls came into existence, that's when they started shaving down the shafts of the hickory clubs thicker and thinner and thinner, I should say. At one point in the 1800s, there were 400 different blacksmiths in Scotland making golf clubs, because they had the forge to pound out the heads, and they were also carriage makers that had the spoke shaves where they could make this bespoke. That's where the word bespoke comes from, is every shaft was crafted differently. The problem with that is every shaft reacted differently to the forces of the club. Now, what happens with a club and why the hosel is attached to the heel of the club, not the middle like a mallet putter, is that you want the momentum of the toe steering the club. That's the whole point of having it hinge around the heel of the club, is so it can act like a rudder. Now, what the old-time golfers had to do, because the shafts twisted so much on the hickory shafts, they actually had to start by dragging the club on the ground and then lifting it, because if they didn't, the face would twist open and then snap shut. What would happen is twist would build up in the shaft and then release in the downswing. So the swing of hickory clubs changed to one of swinging the club so you put tension on this way to pull the ligaments of the wood in this direction, because this is the way the grain of the wood went, and to avoid the twisting action of the face. So in order to be a good golfer in the 1800s, you had to have the ability to understand how each one of your clubs in the bag twisted differently, and to be able to compensate. It used to be said that golfers had good hands. Well, that meant that they had the ability to sense where the toe and face of the club was and then steer it back into the ball. Now, what happened in around 1840 is some British guy came back from India with this gum from a tree in India called gutta percha. It's what your dentist uses to fill your roots when you have a root canal. It's an inert substance, and it has elastic properties. So hitting a feathery was like throwing a knuckleball. There was nothing on there to create airflow, to create the lift you get on a ball. So the first gutty balls were actually smooth, like the featheries, and they would fly like a knuckleball. But what happened, because they were soft, is they would get nicked up by the face of the club. And the golfers started to realize that those nicks changed the aerodynamics. Probably someone at the club, remember, this is 1800s, before anybody had flown an airplane, but they had been practicing with gliders, and they understood, they've understood flight from studying birds. And there was probably some physicist at the club who concluded that, hey, if we put dimples on the ball, that will disrupt the airflow, Bernoulli's principle, and that will create lift. Well, the first dimples on the ball were raised dimples, not the depressed ones in the modern ball. And what happened is, after 3 or 4 hits, half of them would get knocked off and the ball would fly crooked. But that led to the dimpled ball. Now, when they started molding dimpled gutta percha balls, that was the first standardized piece of equipment in the history of golf. And it wasn't really standardized because there were no rules for how big the golf balls could be or how many dimples. There weren't any rules back then. But if you were to buy all of your balls from one manufacturer, then you could learn to hit them consistently. And that is what a golfer named Johnny Laidlay figured out he could do. Johnny Laidlay was a Scottish amateur champion in the late 1890s, and he was the one who actually invented the Vardon grip. Now, Vardon was a professional golfer at the same time who played in the same open tournaments that Johnny Laidlay did, and Vardon copied Johnny Laidlay's grip. If you go to Wikipedia and look up Johnny Laidlay, you'll find his history. So Vardon then came to America in 1904, and he did a barnstorming tour of all of these country clubs. Golf just wasn't a sport in the United States up until then, and he was doing a barnstorming tour, teaching people, introducing them to the game of golf, so everyone in America learned golf with this Vardon grip. I've got a separate video on the evolution of how to do the Vardon grip properly, but let me review here. Forget about anything you've heard about where the V's should point. Where the V's point is an indicator of where the bases of the thumbs wind up when the grip is accomplished properly. The first thing you want to do is hold the club up in the air with your trail hand. Then you want to put your lead hand on so the base of the thumb is on the center of the shaft. You line up the face. So you want the base of your thumb with the center of the shaft, then you want to take the base of your trail thumb and place it on top. Now, when you place your lead hand on here, the difference between the conventional grip and the way I'm suggesting is in the conventional grip, you rest the club on the ground. That results in you putting the fingertips on first, then wrapping the hand around. Well, everybody's hands are different, so your thumb winds up in the different place. This way, you always get the base of the thumb in the right place, and then you simply put the base of the thumb over here and wrap the fingers around the top. Leave this finger dangling. This can either overlap or interlace depending on your hands. And now you have a grip that will act like a hinge. It will turn the hands over equally. So that was the grip that Johnny Laidlay invented back in the late 1890s, and Harry Vardon popularized, and everybody adopted because it works so much better. I had to pause because somebody's blowing their leaves in the backyard here. Why did Johnny Laidlay invent this overlapping grip? The reason he did it is because he realized that with the dimples on the ball and the aerodynamics it created, it was possible to shape the shots with fades or draws to navigate dog legs, and also to control how the ball landed on the green. I mentioned this in a previous video about my background, is that in 1987, when I read Jack Nicklaus's book, Golf My Way, it has one of the best explanations of what shape shots I've ever read. If you visualize a straight hit as a level airplane wing, a fade is a tilt of the spin axis this way, a draw is a tilt of the spin axis that way, and the goal isn't the pretty shape in the air, it is to control where the ball lands on the green and where it goes next. So that was the rationale for shaping shots, and the gutta percha ball in the combination with Laidlay's Vardon grip is what allowed the shaping of shots. So the next evolution of clubs was the invention of the metal shafts, the hollow metal shaft, and the wound rubber ball, which both occurred around early 1900s. I think the ball was first conceived in 1904. And the story behind the Balata wound golf ball was that there was a manager of a Goodyear rubber plant who was a golfer, and one of his golf buddies came into the plant for a round of golf, and they had been making this rubber ribbon for something, and he found one of it wound up on a table somewhere, and he bounced it on the ground, and the thing, it was, if you've ever seen a Super Bowl, that it bounces as high as you drop it. He said, wow, this is great. We should make golf balls out of this. So the original, they called a Goodyear ball because it was the Goodyear Rubber Company that first manufactured them. And what they consist of was a very small round rubber ball, about a ½ inch, and it was filled with an oily substance. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but the reason for that is that liquids do not compress as much as rubber. So then it was wrapped with all these strands, a continuous strand of rubber band. I used to cut these things apart when I was a kid and stretch the rubber bands between trees and jump in them to, like an airplane catapult or an airplane retaining wire. So the whole point of this was that you had a ball that had a very soft cover, which had a high coefficient of friction. It stuck to the face really good to give you spin. Then you had a compressible rubber layer, compressed much more than today's balls, but then in the center you had a center core that didn't compress. It was like the layers of the earth. You have the crust, and then you have the mantle, and then you have the steel core. And that was the evolution of the golf ball, the Balata ball, that the pros adopted in the 1900s. Now, the story with the metal shafts is that they were slow to be adopted because, on the pro level, because the pros were so used to that flexing of the hickory shaft. There was a rivalry, a marketing rivalry between Wilson and Spalding. I think Spalding was the metal shaft and Wilson was the wooden shaft, and Walter Hagen was the sponsor for the metal shafts. He adopted those. He was one of the first adopters and sponsors of that. But Bobby Jones was a die-hard hickory shaft player, and he played with hickory shafts long after the heads went from Massey Nibliks and all those weird named clubs to the gradated series of lofts and irons and match-weighted clubs. Now, the things that what the metal shaft innovation was, now you have a very standardized Goodyear ball manufactured to, precise standards, and you also have standardized clubs. You no longer have the variable of this twisting shaft. So that allowed golfers to now target their shots very precisely. By using the different loft clubs with the same full consistent swing, they were able to determine what their gaps were, what their yardages were with every club, both straight fade, which takes off about 3 to 5 yards depending on how hard you hit it, and draw, which will carry less or will carry more because you've closed the face, so it will be a lower trajectory, longer carry, and then it will roll more because it doesn't check as much. So the pros would go out and they would practice on the course and with their caddies, and they would hit balls. Hogan would go out with his practice caddy, and his practice caddy would sit at 150 yards with a bushel basket, a fruit basket, and smoke a cigarette while Hogan hit 7 irons into the basket, rarely missing because his swing was so consistent. And that was the lesson I took away from reading Hogan's 5 lessons, is that anybody with even minimal athletic ability and flexibility can hit a golf shot every bit as accurately as Hogan did. You might not hit your 7-iron 200 yards, but with practice you'll be able to put them in a fruit basket if you get a well-balanced swing. So what happens in the late 1980s, early 1990s is that fiber shafts are invented, and then they start making these hollow head drivers made of titanium. And Ping invented, this is a Ping I-2, the original Ping I clubs were invented somewhere around 1979, someone told me. I have a set of the original Ping I's. This is a Ping I-2, but they are perimeter weighted, so the mass keeps the club head square as they're taken away. I'll do another video on that. But there was a big evolution of equipment when Ping developed this style of heel-toe weighted club. The pros still use blades because blades will twist in the hands, and that gives you feedback. If you're shaping shots, that twist in the club of a blade iron will tell you give you feedback in your hands by the way it twists where your club head is at all times. Tiger talks about that in his books and in his interviews about how he can tell situational awareness of where the face is at all times from how it feels in his hands. That's the feedback that blades get. Blades are just harder to hit because they have a smaller sweet spot in the face. When you distribute the mass, the sweet spot, and what a sweet spot is the resistance to deflection of off-center hits. So with the Ping I, it's got a colored dot here for the triangle, but that basically where that colored dot is right on the other side of that. That's where the sweet spot of the club is. That's why the I is there and why they're called Ping I's. So there was this big evolution and right around the 60s and the 80s, but the big revolution in golf and swing technology happened when Tiger Woods came on the Pro Tour. At the same time, Titleist launched the Pro V1 ball, and you had these carbon shafted, hollow headed, I think there were 350 cc volume heads, and that very much changed the swing and the game. And I'm going to end this here and then pick it up in the next video.